welcome to Juliet and Lucy's Quiet Leadership Revolution, the podcast for senior and aspiring leaders who want to make their voice heard and their impact felt through thoughtful, reflective, confident leadership. I'm Juliet Corbett, an executive coach and strategist, and I work one-to-one with senior leaders, guiding them to find their strategic focus, empower their teams, and regain control over their time.
And I'm Lucy Gower. I'm a facilitator, trainer and coach, and I empower leaders to build their happy, confident and high-performing teams. Today, I'm really excited because this is the first in a mini-series called Shift Your Perspective. Today, we're talking about if the best leaders do indeed have to have all of the answers. Juliet.
I'm really excited about this. I think this whole series, we're going to be looking at things which, unless checked, might be beliefs or assumptions that you've made about what a leader needs to be or needs to do. And in this one, questioning whether you need to have all the answers as a leader is a really empowering conversation to be having. Because I think a lot of the people that I work with have that assumption hidden deep. And then when they realize that actually it might not be true, maybe it isn't true that you need to have all the answers as a leader, can really, really help you to shift that perspective and feel much more confident about the approach that you're taking to leadership. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. I was speaking with a client just this week who had recently been promoted. So they had been in charge of a program and they've been promoted up so that they were in charge of all of the programs. And they said, "Oh, but I don't know very much about the other programs." And I was like, "Yeah, so what? Does that matter? Is that your role? Your role is leading the people that run those programs now." And I'm acknowledging that that's a really big shift, but we started to really unpick whether you need to know everything or not, and whether indeed that is actually possible.
Yes. You're setting yourself up for a really stressful life, I think, if you try to have all the answers and know all the information. And I think if you have a default assumption that as a leader you need to have the answers, I mean, that's just a recipe for a huge amount of worry and stress and potential imposter syndrome and the kind of constantly thinking that I'm supposed to know this, I'm supposed to be able to know all this information. And it's just not true. You're not there to have all the answers. You're there to facilitate the team, the group of people that you are leading, or the whole organization that you're leading to move forward. That doesn't mean you need to have all the answers. In fact, I'm going to pose that actually it's the questions that are much more important than the answers.
I was going to say exactly the same thing. I think there's two things in there. It's the ability to ask good questions that helps to unpick things for other people. And it's the ability, which is much easier said than done, to be able to take a step back and trust that the people within your team, who perhaps all have specific topic areas where they are specializing and expert, they've got the answers in them about their own particular area. Your job is to help them realize that rather than know it or tell people what to do. I think that's the shift, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there are two shifts potentially of perspective here. That the first key one is that the leader themselves understanding that they don't need to know all the answers, and we can talk in a few minutes about how you can do that, how you can make that shift. But the second part of it, I think, is also there's in some cultures, I wouldn't say all cultures, but in some organizational cultures, there's an assumption that you need to know the leader's opinion. You need to defer to the leader to give you the answers. And so they will, in some cultures, you will, as a leader, find that people are coming to you and saying, "What do you want me to do about this?" And they kind of pose it as a question, which they think they need you to answer. And so I think there's also a conversation to be had around how do you shift the culture in your organization or your team so that there isn't that expectation that they're going to look to you for the answer. And so I think there's almost a two-parter to this, isn't there?
And I'm going to pick up on the second part first, that place where you're feeling like you need to know the answers and people come to you asking for answers, which just exacerbates that feeling of, I need to be able to give people answers. So there's a shift that let's talk about that. But but in that dynamic where someone said, what should I do, or what do I think, there's a really great opportunity for you to be able to go, well, let's have a think about it. What's your thoughts? What's your views? And kind of coaching people to at least have kind of like a range of different options that you might discuss and agree together, but shifting that dynamic to, from what I often describe as like parent child, what should I do, or I'm going to tell you what you need to do, to together let's figure out what this looks like. And those little sort of micro moments can help to shift that culture. And next time you can say, like, come to me with a range, with your thoughts. I'm not here to tell you what's right or what's wrong. And arguably there's, in many circumstances, it's not a case of making a right decision or a wrong decision. It's the best decision that you make at the time with the information that you have.
Yeah, exactly. I think you're right there. Parent-child is a really interesting phrase to be using in that context, and in that kind of ego states analysis of who is the parent, who is the child, what's the dynamic between them. You're trying to both become adults, and so when you've got that adult to adult conversation, actually, the team member would come to the leader with, well, this is the problem, and I think I'm going to do this, but I wanted to talk it through with you. Or this is the challenge we face. We've got 3 options. I'm recommending one, option number 1, but there's also these other things we could do. Let's talk it through. And so when you've got that culture of all adult together, kind of coming together to find the best answer together, it shifts entirely, especially the way that team members come to leaders and the information that they come to leaders with. But it is the leader's role to curate that culture. It's not automatic.
Exactly. And if you've inherited a culture, or you're stepping into a new role where that culture exists, I mean, there's several things you can do. You can do learning and development and training with the team, and you can lead by example. And even though it can be really frustrating because someone asks you what you think they should do, and actually it would be really easy to go, just do this. And for the long game, taking a step back and having the conversation is giving them the tools for the future. So I'm acknowledging when you're busy, you're juggling lots of priorities, you're feeling perhaps a little bit stressed out with everything that you're doing, it can be really easy to perpetuate the parent-child culture. And actually, those little ripples that you can make, and those shifts by saying, well, what do you think? What are the different options? I'm acknowledging how difficult that can be in a pressurized environment.
Yeah, and you might not be able to do that every single time. There might be times when you just think, actually, in this particular situation, this is a one-off thing, I'm just going to give the answer. And that's fine if that is the best way to go forward. The challenge comes when it's repeatedly that way. You're basically creating learned incompetent, or kind of you're training people not to be able to actually step up to their role.
Challenge you on what you just said about giving the answer. I think if the building's on fire, everyone get out, fine. I agree. Sometimes, like, here's the thing to do, but I would always encourage the person to explain why that is the best decision in that context. And without that, you're not giving people the opportunity, exactly like you say, to learn for next time.
Yeah, definitely. No, that's interesting. I kind of assumed that would happen, but you're right to pick up on it. Yes. So even if you are tempted to give the answer, and for some reason there's a very high risk, low sort of urgency, or high urgency, high risk situation. But still defining what was your thinking process? What were the factors that you took into account? What alternatives have you considered and rejected? And you can do that within a minute, 2 minutes. It doesn't need to be a long, lengthy, flow chart discussion of these are the things that I thought about. But definitely externalizing that thinking process then enables other people to see that this is the thought process that I could also, as a team member, have gone through when I come to my leader next time.
And I think that links very much to the first point that you made a few minutes ago about kind of our own expectations of ourselves, about what we should or shouldn't know, because explaining a thought process can help us in our own thinking, but it also just kind of opens up, I suppose it can open up a bit of vulnerability, which I think is the core reason that I see is why leaders can struggle with this kind of feeling of I have to have all the answers. Because if that is a belief that you hold, admitting's not the right word, like being open about not having all of the answers can feel vulnerable, can feel like I'm failing in some way because these are the expectations. And the talking through the thought process, I think, is a step to helping overcome some of those things. What's your take on that?
I think that's right. No, I think that's right. I think that's right. And I think having the confidence to say, either in partnership with someone or in explaining a decision that you've made, explaining the thought process that you've gone through to make that decision or make that recommendation, and then acknowledging I might have missed something. So the question being, what have we missed? What have we not considered? What else is there that could be an unintended consequence
Yes.
of this decision? So if you're role modeling as the leader, externalizing that thought process of, you've given me, we've got three options on the table. I think option B is the one that we should go for, and this is why. And then following that up with a question of what have we missed? What else could go wrong? Is a great way to open up the conversation.
Exactly, because none of us are all knowing, all doing, all seeing. We've all got blind spots. Sometimes we know what they are, sometimes we don't. So that conversation in and of itself can highlight things that we might never have even considered or thought of, or have just assumed that people have understood and know. And that whole piece about unintended consequences is extremely interesting. And there's a tool that I will share to help people do that within the notes.
Fantastic. I want to return to something that you mentioned earlier. Actually, you mentioned that there isn't a right or wrong answer, that there's what's the best answer that we can come up with. I think this is really critical because actually this idea of, as a leader, I need to have all the answers, there's another hidden belief in there, which is that there is an answer.
Yeah.
And actually sometimes you're in what some people call the messy middle. You're in a stage of whatever project or kind of organizational strategy you're leading where there's inherent complexity and uncertainty and volatility, and you don't know how things are going to pan out. And so actually this assumption that even as a team we have to have all the answers is itself quite constraining. And that idea that actually maybe we know the answer for today, as in we know what we're going to try next, but acknowledging that might not be the final answer that we come to, because we're going to pilot something, test something, see how something goes, collect more information.
And that's the whole point of testing and piloting in a product development context, because we see if something works or not. And I think to your point, we can only make the best decisions that we can with the information we've got at that particular point in time. And in organizations, things are changing all the time, and external things are changing all the time too. So I think this mindset of I have to get it right or it has to be perfect is ironically inherently flawed. I don't believe there's any such thing as perfect. And even if there was, what I would think as perfect wouldn't be what somebody else thinks is perfect. So this whole concept of perfection needs to be put in the bin, as far as I'm concerned. And we do the best we can with what we've got. And as a leader in any sphere or at any level, if you can free yourself from this need for perfection, which is why many of the people that we both work with, but I know that we both work with a lot of recovering perfectionists in order to kind of unlock more cohesive, more vulnerable, and more impactful leadership.
Yeah, exactly. And I think hand in hand with that perfection is the idea that it's really helpful as a leader to be really comfortable with not knowing what's going to happen next, not knowing what the answer is, not knowing if something's going to work or not, and becoming comfortable with that is really important, I think, as a leader, especially in a increasingly sort of volatile, uncertain landscape in which we're working.
None of us have got a crystal ball. We can't predict the future. We can only do the best with what we've got, and that's all we can expect of ourselves, and that's also all that we can expect of our senior leadership and the people within our teams. And working on that mindset shift every time you think, oh, is this right or is this perfect, having a a post-it note on your screen kind of saying, you know, perfect doesn't exist. I'm not looking for perfect. I'm looking for the best I can do with what I've got. It's quite liberating, actually, and it can help to reduce sort of stress and anxiety and sort of procrastination, decision fatigue. Well, I need to pick the right answer. You don't. There's nothing to learn by not choosing an answer. You can pick an answer. It may or may not work. And there's where the learning sits.
Yes, because you collect more information as you go forward. Yeah, exactly. What comes to mind actually is there's another loop back to what we talked about earlier there. So if we're saying that actually in influencing up and in leading your team, you acknowledge that there isn't a right answer, we don't know what's going to happen next. Actually, when you've externalized that thinking process, you've automatically talked about what are the risks, what could go wrong, what are the assumptions we're basing this decision on, and if those assumptions pan out not to be true, it means that both managing up and managing your team, you're actually communicating the uncertainty within the decision that you're making. And actually, depending on the high stakes or not, the level of detail that you give might be different, but it's a really useful process to go through.
There's intended consequences and there's unintended consequences, and to have the conversation around that, where, you know, if there's a consequence, you're not necessarily looking at judgment or blame. It's just something that has happened as a result of decisions that have been made that you may or may not have realized. That can help with, again, that feeling that we don't have to be perfect and that everyone's involved in that. It doesn't just sit on the leader's shoulders. Maybe the buck stops with the leader, but in terms of the decision making, involving others in it and in the thinking process is a helpful learning tool.
And actually the buck does stop with the leader. And I think actually, just to clarify what you and I probably have not said, but in kind of assumed that people understand, is that not having all the answers isn't the same as not making a decision. So once you've got the team has discussed it, you've discussed it with someone in your project that you're leading, your organization you're leading, once you've got a sense of what the answer should be through a collaborative partnership process, it is then the leader's role to make that final decision, especially if it's a tough decision. And the harder the decision, the higher up that decision will float before someone needs to make the final call. And having made that decision, you then stand by it. I don't mean you never change it. You don't ever admit, you need to admit if something's not working to shift. But there's nothing worse. I think you and I probably worked for people like this before. There's nothing worse than someone who's constantly asking the questions, which are great questions, but never actually making the tough decision. Because that is the leader's role. Because that's how you move forwards.
Agreed.
I've got a book recommendation on this, actually. So there's a fantastic book called Turn the Ship Around by David L. Marquette. I'll put the links in the episode notes. It's an example of pushing away the idea that the leader always needs to have the answers. It's based on a nuclear submarine, and it's really about getting people in the nuclear submarine to say, I intend to, and then saying to the commander, I intend to, and then some kind of complicated submarine technology lingo. And then the commander saying, go ahead, or no, let's talk about this. And so actually you can use it really effectively in organizations. It's a good read. Fantastic. It's quite nice. Easy.
Fantastic. Good. I look forward to reading it.
Put the link in the notes.
So thinking, Juliet, what are the things that you'd like listeners to take away from this session today?
So first of all, realizing that as a leader, you don't need to have all the answers. That's not your role. I think really practicing and learning how you can ask really good questions and how that works for you. And anytime you want to make a statement, switch it into a question and see what happens, kind of practicing those coaching questions for your team. And then realizing that actually it's about shifting the perspective or the expectations of the people around you as well. And that culture change takes time. And it's lots of small actions that will get you there. How about you, Lucy?
I mean, very similar. I think for me, there's something very practical about holding fire. When someone says, what do you think I should do? Don't just tell them. If you can, help them work with you to decide. So back to what you were saying about good coaching questions rather than just giving answers. And I think let's be kind to ourselves. We can do, as long as we're always doing the best we can with what we've got. I think that's something to hold on to rather than trying to get it right or be perfect.
Yeah, an excellent lesson to take away from this conversation. So, Lucy, how can you help people with reframing this perspective that they don't need all the answers?
Yeah, come and work with me. I work one-to-one with leaders, and I also train teams in this piece around culture, specific workshops around growth mindset, learning from failure, asking good questions. How about you, Juliet? How can you help people?
Yeah, similar. So when I'm working one-to-one executive coaching with leaders, a lot of it is about helping them to realize that they don't need all the answers and helping them to frame really great questions that they can be asking the people around them and figuring out what questions work.
Brilliant.
So I can help people with that as well in coaching. So, thank you for spending your time with us today. Don't forget that if we want to make our voice heard and our impact felt, then we need to give ourselves the space to think, the courage to lead, and the confidence to adapt. I'm Juliet Corbett, an executive coach and strategist working one-to-one with senior leaders.
And I'm Lucy Gower, a facilitator, trainer, and coach, helping leaders develop high-performing teams. Join us next time for the Quiet Leadership Revolution.